Welcome everyone to Gramercy Books Author Conversation. Today we're featuring World War II survivor and former journalist Selma van de Perre. My conversation with, and she will be in conversation with noted historian Robin Judd. Tonight we're featuring My Name is Selma, a powerful, gripping memoir by this extraordinary Jewish resistance fighter and Ravensbrück concentration camp survivor. Full of hope and courage, My Name is Selma was released earlier this month by Scribner, an imprint of Simon & Schuster. I want to thank Ohio State's Department of History, Ohio State's Melton Center for Jewish Studies, and Jewish Columbus, who are Gramercy's community partners for today's program. I'm Linda Cass. We are live streaming this program through Zoom webinar, and it will be recorded. Let me preview the next hour or so for you. After introductions, Selma and Robin will talk for about 35 to 40 minutes. That will be followed by 15 to 20 minutes for your questions submitted in the Q&A box. And you will find that icon for the Q&A box on the bottom of your screen if you're using. This is where Robin will be taking your questions for Selma during the latter portion of this program. You can write your questions into this box at any time during the program. Those questions, liked by many others, will be upvoted, which means they'll rise to the top of the Q&A box and may be more likely to be asked. Another tool is the chat box. This allows you to chat among yourselves, but it will not be monitored by the panelists. That icon also is in the bottom of your screen on your desk or laptop. We hope your chats don't distract you from what will be an intriguing conversation today. I want to draw your attention for a moment to the chat box. So click onto that icon now, and it will open a column to the right of your screen. We've placed registration links for several upcoming live streamed programs hosted by Gramercy Books. On Thursday, June 3rd at 7 p.m., award-winning journalist Alec McGillis will be in conversation with Columbus Business First editor-in-chief Doug Buchanan to discuss fulfillment, winning and losing in one-click America, Alec's literary investigation of Amazon's impact on the wealth and poverty of towns and cities across the United States. On Thursday, June 10th at 7 p.m., we'll feature a conversation about memoir and other forms of creative nonfiction as we feature Lee Martin and his latest memoir, Gone the Hard Road. Lee will be in conversation with acclaimed creative fiction author and editor, Dinty W. Moore. And finally, on Tuesday, June 15th, 7 p.m., a not-to-be missed visit with produce guru Farmer Lee Jones, author of a gorgeous, soulful cookbook called The Chef's Garden, a modern guide to common and unusual vegetables. Farmer Lee will be in conversation with American ice cream maker, entrepreneur, and author Jenny Britton Bauer. I want to encourage you to click on the link for any of these programs if you want to learn more about them. And if you want to sign up, for our newsletter, which has much more information about these programs, I encourage you to go to our website, www.gramercybooksbexley.com, and you can sign up there. And now on to our exciting program. Selma van de Perre was 17 when World War II began. She lived with her parents, two older brothers, and a younger sister in Amsterdam. And until then, being Jewish in the Netherlands had not presented much of an issue. But by 1941, it had become a matter of life or death. With her family captured and nowhere else to turn, Selma took on an assumed identity, dyed her hair blonde, and joined the Dutch resistance movement, using the pseudonym Margaretha van der Kuyt, where she risked her life, passing as non-Jewish, traveling around the country, and even to Nazi headquarters in Paris, sharing information and delivering papers until her luck ran out in July of 1944. She became a political prisoner at Ravensbrück women's concentration camp, surviving by using her alias. Only after the war ended could she reclaim her identity and dare once again to say, my name is Selma. Shortly after the war, Selma van de Perre moved to London, where she worked for the BBC and met her future husband, the Belgian journalist Hugo van de Perre. For several years, she also worked as a foreign correspondent for a Dutch television station. In 1983, Selma van de Perre received the Dutch Resistance Commemoration Cross. She lives in London and has a son. Selma, it is a thrill to welcome you today and for Gramercy Books to share your extraordinary story with our Central Ohio community.
Thank you very much. I'm very pleased to be here and share my story with you. And I love America. I've been several times, and I do have several American friends. So I love it. It's just a shame that I'm not being able to be with you in person because of the COVID.
We feel the same way, Selma. Thank you so very much. And it is also in conversation with you, Robin Judd, I want to introduce. Robin is an associate professor of history at The Ohio State University. Dr. Judd is an expert in modern European and Jewish history, and she serves as vice president of programming for the Association of Jewish Studies. Robin, welcome back to Gramercy Books, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Linda. This is such a thrill. I really appreciate the invitation.
Well, I'm going to back off. I just want to thank all of you in the audience for joining us today, and really look forward to this conversation between Selma and Robin. Thank you.
Thank you. Selma, it is such an honor and privilege to be able to meet you. I've been so struck by the gift that you have given us by writing your memoir and making it available for us to read. You tell a fascinating and inspiring story about a Jewish woman who becomes involved in the resistance, faces capture, experiences the horrors of two very different camps, and then after liberation, deals with her own past traumas to create a new life for herself. So thank you for your tremendous gift to us. I wanted to start with your beginning. You begin the memoir by introducing us to your pre-war life in the Netherlands and to your family, many of whom the Nazis and their collaborators murdered during the Holocaust. You write that, quote, like most people, I was born into an ordinary family whose experiences were noteworthy only to those involved. I'm wondering, can you start us off by telling the audience a little bit about your childhood and maybe share with us one story that you find particularly noteworthy about your pre-war life?
Well, as I'm telling in the book as well, I am one of four children. My parents had two boys. They were 13 and 11 years older than me. And then came I in 1922. And then my little sister came 6 years after that. That's what I meant with a normal family. We just lived pleasantly like everybody else before the war.
And I think one thing that's so striking about you're telling us about your family and these experiences right before the war and then as the war breaks out is that for many people who read your memoir, they don't know about the specific history of the Netherlands. And your memoir so brilliantly explains how German occupation changes with the February strike of 1941. And so can you talk a little bit about the February strike of 1941 and how that pushes the Nazis to intensify their actions in the Netherlands?
Yes, the didn't go into the First World War. They were neutral. They thought at this time, for the Second World War, it would happen as well. But they started taking away Jewish people very slowly. You hardly noticed it, but they did. And because of that, the Dutch people, the Dutch ones, the non-Jewish ones, decided to go on strike against the behavior of the Germans, of the new government really as well, against the Jews. And because they were doing things like that, very small and very little ones, but even so, the Dutch thought that was not good enough, and they went on strike. And because they went on, they not only did they go on strike, but because the Dutch police and the fascists, the Nazi group in Holland, started to behave against the Jewish people in a most atrocious way, and started to hit them and follow them to places and so. And also, the Jews were not allowed, after about a year of occupation, to go in the trams anymore, to use transport, to own cars, to own watches, to go to the cinema. You weren't allowed to go to restaurants, and you weren't allowed to visit your non-Jewish friends, and they were not allowed to visit you. So all these things made for the Dutch population to become very angry, and they decided to strike. And when they did, there was a fight in the Jewish neighborhood, and one of the Dutch Nazi chaps got hurt and later on died from his injuries. And as a represalia for that, the government, well, the Germans really, but by that time it was the government influence, took 20 boys from their bed and sent them to a very bad concentration camp in Germany and Austria and Czechoslovakia, and killed them there. And that was the beginning of it all.
Yeah, and you talked a little bit in the memoir at various points about some of your very close non-Jewish friends, including Greet. How were you, and I probably mispronounced her name, how were you able during this time to maintain that relationship with her?
Greater,
Yeah.
you would say in English, yes, great. She always visited us. My father, when the rule came out that Christian people weren't allowed to go and visit Jews, my father said the only one who will come is Great. And he was quite right. All during the war, she came and visited us, and she helped me as well quite a bit, as I explain in my book. She was a good friend all through the war and after the war.
I really appreciated how you started your memoir with the prologue and your letter to her, and then you ended the war, the memoir, with the end of the war and coming back and her finding that letter. It was just such a reminder of what an incredible friendship that must have been, and what risk she and you took in creating and fulfilling that relationship.
She and her parents took great risks. Because I often during the war, if I was for my resistance job in Amsterdam, I used to sleep with her. So they took a great risk. And also when I sent a little note, which I threw out of the window out of the wagon and the train when we were taken to Germany from Holland concentration camp. And she hid that. in a box, so that she really forgot about it all these years. Only a few years before her death, which is about 10 years ago, did she move to a flat on the ground floor, and she found her box when she moved, and she found my letter in that as well. And and the publisher thought it was a good idea to start off with the letter and finish with it again.
I think the publisher was right. It really, it brings the memoir together so beautifully. And you just mentioned your involvement in the resistance movement. How did you first learn about the resistance movement in the Netherlands?
Well, very slowly. I mean, the resistance movement was getting on very slowly too. It was just people helping, people who helped Jewish people to find places for them to hide. That's how it started. There was no resistance movement to start off with. But surely and suddenly it started to improve, and because many Jewish people had to hide, because otherwise they were sent to Poland, to the concentration camp. And don't forget, we were going to be sent to work camps, they said all the time. The calling up letter said for a work camp in Poland. Of course, we now know that wasn't true at all, but we didn't then. We thought it was to work. And Greet and I became very friendly. When I was 10, we went back to Amsterdam from Diemen, and I went to play out in the streets, which in those days you did. And Greet lived just opposite me and came down and said, "Would you like to play with my ball?" And so we played with the ball together, and we were friends since then, all through the years. That was when I was 10 and she was 11. So you can imagine how long it was and how marvelous it was. The family was a strict Catholic family. Her father helped in the church, and she went to church. They went to church every morning, and they were very religious, but such good people you never met before. They were very, very good.
One aspect of your memoir that is so inspiring has to do with the goodness of so many people, of some of your close friends, of the fellow members of the resistance movement. I'm wondering if you can share with us how you started contributing to the resistance movement.
Yes, it was really by a coincidence, because I needed a hiding place because the one I was in wasn't good enough, they said, the resistance. And somebody found me a place in Leiden with doctors, and he was a doctor too. And I was hiding there as a German person who had to hide from the Germans from being sent to Poland. And while I was there was a lot of, or several, doctors in Leiden, because Leiden is like Oxford, a famous university town. Sorry. And also and also a famous hospital, Leiden Hospital, and that's where they were. The people I stayed with, I was hiding with, they both were at the Leiden Hospital, because the man who took me there was Wim Storm, Dr. Wim Storm, and because my friends thought that I needed another place, he thought that would be good in Leiden. But because after a while, he was helping a lot as a doctor for Jewish people who were in hiding and needed a doctor. Don't forget, we couldn't go to a doctor officially anymore. So he used to help out. And especially his qualifications were really for pregnant women, genealogy. And he brought to life quite a lot of babies during the war. And the Germans were looking for him. They started to know that he was working as a resistance. By then it became a resistance movement. And so he had to leave his job. And the person I was staying with in Leiden, at that time, took over his job as head of the department. Although she was only 23, but because he had to leave, she took it over. And the other girl was also at the hospital as at the head of the laboratory. And while I was there, other doctors came to dinner quite often and were telling stories that they were taking Jewish people to hiding places. And they told stories about people behavior in the train or somewhere else. And it was very interesting. And what I then realized after a while was that there was a movement, a doctors' movement in Leiden already, which later on became the resistance movement. And not on their own, because there were other resistance movements in the north of Holland. And we all combined each with others. But while I was there, these doctors came and told their stories. And they also, one evening, they said how short they were of people, because at that time, by that time, after I'd been there some months, the Germans also started to send Dutch non-Jewish women, men and boys to Poland to work, or to Germany to work. They got calls up saying that they had to go to a work camp. The only exception was if they wanted to study at the university. But to study at the university, they had to sign a loyalty letter, which many of them, loyal to the Germans, which many of them didn't want to do. And they had to go into hiding. So not only did we have Jewish people in hiding, but also non-Jewish boys and men who didn't have a job were sent and called up to go and work in Germany. Some of them did, of course, but some of them refused and went into hiding. So an awful lot of material was needed: identity cards and food cards, ration books, and money for the people who went into hiding, for the families where they were. And so slowly but surely the resistance movement started to come into existence and work together, which was very good. And one evening, when they were saying that they were short of people because they couldn't use many boys anymore because they had to go to work camps if they were walking around. And I said, "Can I help?" And they said, "Oh yes, would you?" And that's how it started. I first started to fill in resistance illegal papers into envelopes and send them away. But quite soon I was asked to do missions, to take suitcases with illegal papers or food cards or money to families where Jewish people or non-Jewish people were hiding. And that's how I got into the movement, the resistance movement.
And at this point, you already had taken on an assumed name, right? So only a few people.
First of all, in Leiden, when I came there as a Jewish refugee, they gave me the room of a girl who lived there. She had gone to America with the last boat. And she left all her things in that room, which I used. And they told me, therefore, to use her name as well. So that's what I did. I was Jill Butter for a few months, really. But after I did a lot of resistance work with suitcases and papers and so, and I traveled over in Holland by train to the north or the south of Holland. It was thought that I should have a better identity. And also by that time, the resistance movement had contacts with people in the community people who were working in registrars and so. And some of them started to help the resistance. And so it was thought that I should try. By that time, the Germans were changing the ID cards, which was very bad, of course, because all the ID cards had been given out and redone, and some of them were false, of course, but they were there. So if the Germans thought of giving out new ID cards, we had to give them as well. And I was asked to be the first guinea pig to go and fetch a proper ID card from the registrar office. And that what they had done was the registrar had taken out a baby's name and card, because when you're born, you know, you have to give the name and everything, and that's registered on a card system. At least it was in those days in Holland. And they had put the name of a baby who had just born and who died a few months after that. And her name was Margaretha van der Kuit. And they gave me that identity card. I had to fetch it, new identity card. And that was all right. It went all right. And with that card, I had to go and fetch distribution card, that's for the food. And I had to fetch vouchers for shoes and for clothes, because that was the only way you could buy something. There wasn't very much to be bought. And I did that with my new identity card, and it went all right. So they thought, oh, well, that's good. And they had one or two other people in the resistance they did that for afterwards. So I had this new identity card. And they also, the resistance movement, which was a very big one by that time already, in the north and the center and the south, it all went together, you see, they helped each other. They were separate because you didn't want to tell anybody that you were in the resistance, of course. It was much too dangerous in case you were caught and tortured. But people did go to meetings together and work together. I mean the resistance movement people. It was thought, though, as I was traveling so much, that I should go and live in Utrecht, because all the trains in Holland go through Utrecht, the main quarter for train. And so that I didn't need to change so often as you do if you lived somewhere else. And that's what they did. They found me a room in Utrecht, and I lived in Utrecht and did a lot of traveling for them.
You were remarkably brave, courageous, inventive. The stories, and I hope everyone, all 82 people on this call will read the memoir, because it's so remarkable what you did and how you did it. I'm wondering if one of the things that you can share with us, because you were talking about Dr. Strom and the hospital, is the way in which the resistance became involved when a mother gave birth to a child, and perhaps share with our audience. In fact, I think in one case, you were also involved in trying to distract the mother, if I'm remembering correctly, of one of your cousins.
Oh, yes, that was one of my cousins. Yes. She was in the Jewish hospital in Amsterdam, giving birth to the third baby. And I was looking after the two other ones, making food, boiling, and so on. And she was in the hospital. And one of my friends, Dientje, who turned out to be part of the resistance movement, but I didn't know then. This was long before I went to Leiden. Dientje asked me, would I go to the hospital and talk to Riki, the mother, to be, while the baby had been born, the day the baby had been born, and take the baby away. because the baby was going in baby wards. So all I did was take the baby, and she thought, Ricky, the mother, that he was going to the baby ward, but I gave him out in another hallway to Dientje, who was then taking him to a Christian family in the south of Holland. And they survived. All three children survived, actually.
And that's how so many.
That's how I moved, yes.
Yeah, and that's how so many children who were born could survive, right? Was because people like Dientje then took these children and hid them. And
there was a Jewish theater where the man who arranged it all, there was on the other side was a little children's nursery school and baby nursery. And loads of those children were saved by the people who put them in the rucksack or in a bag or something, small ones, and took them to Christian families. Loads of them were saved that way.
Yeah. So incredible. As a reminder to our members of the audience, in about 10 minutes, I'll start going through the Q&A. If you have questions, you should put them in the Q&A. So I'm only looking at the Q&A box. If you have questions, put them in the Q&A. Selma, one of the things that you emphasize in the book is the ways in which Jews were involved in the Dutch resistance. Why is it so important for us to understand that Jews were involved in the Dutch resistance?
Well, that's what people don't know, you see, because when they were caught, they were sent to Auschwitz and killed straight away, so hardly any of them survived. But many of them were. There was the whole WWII group, that was the boys and girls who came over from Germany and Austria before the war to go to Palestine, as it was called then, Israel. And they were in Westerbork, which was later on a transit camp, but then it was just a camp for boys and girls, those German and Austrian boys and girls who were learning to be a farmer, because they wanted to go to Palestine and farm there. They mostly were Zionists, of course, but they were caught by the war. They were still in Holland, and they did an awful lot of good work. Hardly any of them survived. I only know about 2 or 3 who survived. But they did an awful lot, because they were the ones who started to find ways of crossing the borders, the border to Belgium and the border to France. And there were loads of people, hundreds of them, which have escaped that way to France and then to Portugal, to Spain and Portugal, and then to England, or to Switzerland, or to Palestine. Many people have been saved that way. So they really did an awful lot of good work. And as I say, many of them didn't survive, as well as the men who ran those children's saving. He didn't survive either. He got caught in the end, and then was killed on one of those walks.
One of the death marches?
Yeah.
Yeah. There are many times in the memoir, Selma, when you talk about how a personal characteristic or an experience or a connection helped you survive. I'm wondering
what I want to add to the other thing is that I think it's very important people now realize that Jewish people weren't just lambs to go to the slaughter. They did resist. And so, but sorry, what was your question?
No, I think that that's right. I mean, I have to tell you, one of the things that I so appreciated in the memoir was that you sort of give us a gift for those of us who teach the history of the Holocaust, because you're constantly giving context. And I think when you talk about the Jews in the resistance, it's a great example of that, where so many people don't know that Jews were involved in the resistance, or so many people don't know that in the Netherlands, it was the most horrific starvation
No,
techniques
exactly.
that the Nazis enacted in
Exactly. When I heard, that's what the reason why I wrote the book, because I thought so many books have been written about Holocaust survivors and so, but not about people, non-Jews, working in the resistance and going to concentration camps. And I thought that should be told as well as the Jewish resistance, as well as the Christian resistance.
Yeah.
And I know that in England, for instance, hardly anybody knew that there was a resistance in Holland, that there were concentration camps, except for Auschwitz and Bergen-Belsen. They knew that, of course. But, you know, that's one of the reasons why I decided in the end to write a book.
And I'm so glad that you did.
Yes, everybody says that.
Well, and they're right.
I'm
another-
so surprised about it myself, you know. I'm getting used to it now with all you asking me to talk about it. But I was very surprised it was so top of the booksellers list for weeks and weeks in Holland.
And it should have been, and I'm glad it was, and may that continue. May we all be reading this book and talking about it.
Maybe.
I'm wondering too, if before I start looking at the other questions, if you can also talk about something else that's really unique in your memoir, which is your liberation story. So because you were a Dutch citizen, your liberation was different than I think most of us think about liberation. So can you share that with us?
Yes. We Dutch and Belgian women were called out one morning for appel, roll call. And we thought that we were going to be killed because lots of older people a few months before that had been killed that way. And so we thought so too. There was nothing we could do. But in the end, we marched to because you were never told anything, of course, you were just told to march. And we marched to the camp, the main camp, because we came from the Siemens camp, it was on top of the hill. And then we stayed in the camp, in the main camp, for about, I think, 9 days or something like that. And we still thought we'd be killed because on that time, they were still killing women every day. Even the day we were freed, they were killing 13 women. But in the end, we were told to march on the 23rd of April outside the gate. And there we were standing and didn't know what was happening at all. We were standing, waiting there. And then suddenly one day, we were standing there in the morning, and then late afternoon, an open sports car arrived with a young man in it. And he jumped out and he told us he was a Swede from Sweden. And he was a friend of Count Volker Bernadotte, who was vice president of the Red Cross. And he was going to come with white buses and free us. Well, no buses came, so we didn't believe the story. There had been so many stories in the camp, which never turned out to be true, you know, that we didn't believe it. And then we were telling him our stories, and you could see in the man's face that he didn't believe us at all. Well, it was unbelievable, the things we had told him. They were atrocious stories. And then the next morning, sorry, I'm just reading what it says suddenly on my screen.
Oh, yeah,
Selma,
don't worry about the chats
No.
or the questions and answers.
And
I'll start asking questions in a minute.
And then, so we told him our story and so, but he didn't believe. He gave us cigarettes, the first cigarette I've had after the war, and chocolates and so. He was very sweet. And he lit my cigarette. That's a funny story too, I must tell you. I write it in the book. He lit my cigarette and he gave a fire. And then my Aufseherin, the guard we had all these months, called out of the window of her room, Nicht rauchen, Marga. Don't smoke, Marga. And then the Swede said, you can smoke as much as you like. She hasn't got to tell you anything anymore. It was then that I thought we might be free, you know. I believed then the story that we probably were freed. But nothing came, no white buses, until the next morning. We stood there the whole night. He told us to go back in the camp and sleep, and we said never. He thought we had normal beds and everything. So the next morning, 3 trucks arrived, military trucks with tarpaulin over it. And the young ones amongst us were told to jump in, and we were going to be taken, we then believed it, we were going to be taken to Denmark and Sweden. But on the way to Denmark, half an hour from the camp, they told us to get out and have a drink and chocolate and sandwiches and everything else. And we were sitting in the grass when suddenly a lot of shooting was starting. And so the drivers told us to get back quickly in the cars and the vans, and off we went. And it turned out, we were told later on, that 13 women were killed, even then.
It's so remarkable because when one is reading the memoir, you learn, if you didn't know already, or you remember if you had forgotten, that liberation takes place really slowly. And you are liberated when the camp is itself still running, which again, to many people would be new and quite surprising. We have so many questions. I'll try to get through.
2 days after this, or a few days, on the 28th, they sent women on a march, really. And many of them were killed still.
Yeah.
So we were very lucky to escape that.
It was incredibly fortunate. And there are many questions. I'll try to pull some together. One person asks that when she goes through trauma and stress, she often processes it long after the event was over. And the reader was wondering, was there a moment when your emotions caught up with you, or was it that you began to process the traumas much later?
No, when I was in London, when I arrived in London and I was working there, I felt very bad, very badly, yes. I cried every night. I couldn't sleep. And I suddenly realized what I had lost, yes. My parents and my home. I did have my brothers there, or at least one of them was there, but they had their lives. They'd made their lives already during the war. They were so much older anyhow. And they had no idea what I went through, really.
Were there?
Sorry?
No, please continue.
My youngest brother, David, he was the one who worked for the Ministry of War as a military man. And that's where I got my job as well, in London. And well, he went every weekend, he went to his fiancée in Birmingham, whom he married later on. And I was alone a lot. And I felt it. And of course, it all came back then. I'd been very busy in during the war. And then I was very busy in Sweden, because when the ambassador came to tell us that the war was over, when we were in Scouter's camp, he asked me, Thea Bosseva and me, would we come to Stockholm and to the embassy and the consulate to help out with all the ex-prisoners who came from the concentration camps. And that's what I did. I went to Stockholm and helped out. My first job was to write to sick people in hospitals or with staying with families and ask what they needed, and then give the list to the people in the embassy, and they took care of it. And after that, I had to make up a list for people going back to Holland, because there were no civil flights at all, of course, but there were special flights for us. And they filled up a plane, and I had to make the list of people who were going first, which was difficult because everybody almost wanted to go quickly back to Holland.
A couple of people have asked about what helped you survive. Were there certain aspects that you think were important in your survival?
Yeah, I know many people have asked me that during these years, and it's very difficult to answer. But I think part of it is, I describe it in the book as well. I had a feeling of survival. I felt I wanted to survive. I didn't want the Germans to have the satisfaction of having killed me. And I always had hope that it was really finishing. And I had very good friends. I must say that there were times that I thought I was going to be dead, because I was very poorly sometimes. But some people were very nice. I had a Czech friend who got me some food at the right time when I was almost going bad. And she also helped me to get clothes when it became very cold. She told me that there was a Czech woman in charge of the department where they had all the bags with clothes of people who were in prison. And I should go there and she would give me some warm clothes. And she did. She knew exactly who I was, because they were so friendly with each other, they were so helpful, the Czechs. They worked in the kitchens, and she brought me once a slice of bread with cut onions, which brought me back to life again. And these things happened, people were very kind and helped.
What?
And I
Yeah.
think that's one of the reasons why I got through. Also because I wanted to. I had the feeling I wanted to survive. As I said, I didn't want the Germans to have the satisfaction of having me dead.
What do you think made you so brave, and what kind of prompted you to come out of hiding and put your life at risk by working in the resistance?
Well, I didn't come out of hiding and did that like that. I mean, it was an accident, really, when I said, "Can I help?" I just wanted to help because they were so short of people. And slowly but surely, I was used for sending illegal newspapers away and ration cards and money. And so it just went very slowly, but it did. And I asked after the war, actually, you say this, because after the war now, in the last 40 years or so, certainly the last 10 years, I asked myself, I never had the thought of fleeing myself. I knew that people went to Switzerland and to Israel and to Portugal, Spain and Portugal and England. I never thought of it. I don't know why not, but I never did.
And you were aware, though, of the particular danger that you were in because you were a Jew
Yes,
pretending to be a
but
Christian.
we don't forget we didn't know what we know now.
That's true. Absolutely.
So, I don't know if I would have known. I don't know if I would have done anything like that then, or just stay. I often ask myself, why didn't I just stay in hiding like several of the other people did? The other girl with me in Leiden, she came also to join, and she stayed there till the last day of the war. So why didn't I? I don't know.
Were any of your friends or even family who knew about what you were doing, or
No.
were they worried about you, and
No.
were you able to respond to those
No,
concerns?
no, they didn't know. Even Great might have thought that I was doing something, but I never told her.
Do you have advice for us today as we're living in this world where anti-Semitism is on the rise?
Well, of course, it is very bad, isn't it? Yes. I had always hoped that writing the book and telling the story would be for people to think about it, and so that it would never happen again. But we see in the Middle East, for instance, it does happen, doesn't it? And in the Far East, and in the far eastern part of Europe. It's very bad. But I hope it will turn out all right. I go every year. I have been for the last 20 years. I go to Ravensbrück with a group of teachers who have just finished their teachers' education. And there were about 60 to 80 of them. And I give them a workshop. I tell them about what happened in Ravensbrück and what they can tell the children they teach. They teach young children. So that's very important. And when the Dutch Ravensbrück Association asked me, when in the beginning, when it was just going with little children, I was busy building up my own life. And I said no. But when they told me about the students, the teachers, I thought that's a good idea. And so I've been every year and did a week with them. And last 5, 6 years I've done it in Germany as well. Take German students to Ravensbrück and tell them. And it's very important and it's very necessary, because now, for instance, I had letters from some of these students who were in my workshops very much in the beginning and who are teachers now. And one of them has become the Ravensbrück Association voorzitter.
Director.
Chairwoman. And the other one, the man, has become the treasurer. And he wrote me a letter when he became the treasurer, and he said, "You don't remember me, of course. I was one of the first ones in your group in that and that year." And but here is a photo which was taken from you and me before I left. And that, he was so nice about it all. And it shows you, though, how important it was and how good it was, because they are now ruling the Dutch Ravensbrück Association and doing their best and volunteering for it, of course. So that's very good. It has made some impression, at least.
Absolutely. I hate to say this, but this will be our last question, and I'm sorry that we couldn't get to everything. But on that note, is there one piece of advice that you want to impart to us, that you want us to take away of the lessons of your story?
Well, there are several things actually, but if people read my book, then they can see it. I do say it several times, but I feel that people would be much better off. And I'm talking about, not about economics, but in minds. I think if people would personally be much more tolerant with each other and listen to other people and put yourself in other people's shoes. You may not believe the same things as they do. You may not think it's right, but you don't need to quarrel. You don't need to fight. You don't need to make a war of it. I think you can talk about it, and you should try and solve things. Be tolerant. I mean, you can't be intolerant, of course, entirely. When there is tolerant entirely, when it's intolerance, it's very difficult. But one has to try. And I think if everybody would try, also governments, then we would be much better off.
Here, here. I think that's absolutely right.
I know it is much to ask, but I think if we do try in our little circles, start in the family circle, start not quarreling in your families, in your friendships, in your schools. Start small, because small quarrels become big, and big quarrels become wars. I'm convinced of that. And I think you should try not to.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that inspirational ending and reminding us of the importance of first of listening to these past stories. And there were 82 people here today who had the opportunity to hear your story, a story that I think many of us are not familiar with, and then to take that story forward, to think about the ways in which, and I love this language, we can be tolerant in an intolerant world. Recognizing that we can't be 100% tolerant, but identifying ways in which we can find tolerance among intolerance.
Exactly.
Thank you. Linda, I will hand the floor over to you.
Robin, thank you so much for your wonderful questions. And Selma, I just want to share that the audience was extremely moved and engaged, as I was. And at your story, the bravery boggles the mind, said one attendee. Another attendee was watching with his children because he wanted them to know and understand this story of yours and this history of ours. And, you know, being a witness, you are a witness, and you writing this book has made us a witness. And so we thank you so very, very much for sharing your story with us. And I just want to let everyone know about this story. In the chat box, we're going to put another link to Selma's wonderful memoir, My Name is Selma. And if you haven't gotten a copy for yourself, get one, and get one for someone you care about who should know more about tolerance and walking in another person's shoes. This is so important in the world today. So thanks to all of you for joining us. And just for taking some time off your Memorial Day weekend. Selma, you are, as one attendee said, you are an international treasure. And we are so very, very honored to hear your story and to have been able to experience a conversation with you. And thank you again for being with us.
Thank you. for
And
having me.
And Robin as well. And also to thank Nikki Snyder, our back-end administrator, our streaming engineer, and who made all this possible technically. And to all of you in the audience for your wonderful reactions and comments. Have a great rest of your weekend, everyone.
Thank you.
And Gramercy books. Thank you.
Thank you, Selma. Thank you. Wish we were in person.